Hi, Mrs. Fernanda here. We're going to get back to the Losers Club by Andrew Clements. We are now on chapter 14, so please open your books to page 72 and read along with me. After school on Monday, this chapter is called If the Shoe Fits. I love that. After school on Monday, Alec hurried to the gym, checked in, and got himself settled at his table. All day he'd been sharply aware of the deal he'd made with his parents, aware that this coming Friday he was going to have to ask each of his teachers to rate his work for the week. Feeling tempted to read during a class wasn't a problem, not since his meeting with Mrs. Vance, but daydreaming was another matter. And twice during this long Monday, he'd started thinking about the Olympians and their superpowers, once during math and once in social studies. Fortunately, he'd caught himself before Mrs. Seward or Mrs. Henley had, which was amazing, considered where he had to sit. But sitting up front and being forced to pay attention did have one clear advantage. All the assignments and quizzes so far had seemed ridiculously easy. Lily showed up at the club table a few minutes later, carrying a backpack that looked like it weighed about as much as she did. She smiled and heaved the bag onto the table. "I wanted to be the first one here today, but you beat me." Alec smiled and said, "It's not really a race." He nodded at her backpack. "Looks like some serious homework tonight." "Nope," she said. "I brought books." She zipped the back open and began pulling them out. Shiloh, Because of Winn-Dixie, 4 different Wimpy Kid titles, Tuck Everlasting, Tales from a Not So Graceful Ice Princess, Bud Not Buddy, Number the Stars, a Harry Potter book. The stack kept growing, at least 20 in all. And the last book she pulled out was her very own copy of Charlotte's Web, which looked a lot less worn than Alec's. "Great books," he said. "A lot of my favorites." He was about to tell Lily that she probably only needed to bring 1 or 2 at a time, but she was excited and he didn't want to pop her balloon. So he said, "If you want to keep some of those books here, I could get a bin from Mr. Wilner. Just make sure you write your name on all of them." Then he asked, "Which one are you reading today?" She picked up the Ice Princess book. "This one. I just got it." "Nice," Alec said. Lily settled onto a seat opposite Alec near the center of the table and then said, "I'll be quiet now. I know you want to read." She was right, and he said, "Thanks." Alec had brought a collection of short stories by an author named Ray Bradbury. The book was new, or at least it was new to him. It had belonged to his dad back when he was in 8th grade, and it was science fiction, like a lot of the books his dad loved. He got it out of his backpack, and the slightly yellowed pages of the old paperback opened by themselves to a story called All Summer in a Day. Alec started to read, and just as his dad had promised, Bradbury's writing grabbed him and didn't let go. The story took place at a school on the planet Venus. All the kids were excited because, for the first time in their lives, the sun was going to shine in the sky for a whole day. There was a girl named Margot who had been born on Earth and could still remember what sunshine was like and how wonderful it was. And she kept talking about it, and the other kids got jealous and started hating her. The end of the story made Alec feel like he'd been punched in the stomach. He sat there staring at the last sentence. He felt so sorry for Margot. The story wasn't long, so he flipped back and read the whole thing again. This time, he noticed how totally he believed that these kids lived on Venus. And he noticed that the way the writer made him feel how amazing plain old sunshine would seem to a kid who had never experienced it. Then Alec remembered where he was, in the gym, sitting at his own club table. Lily was there reading, but Nina wasn't, and it was already 20 minutes after 3. Maybe she had to go to the dentist, or maybe she had to stay after class to work on math, or maybe she decided to go get some help with that big social studies report that's due in November, or maybe Alec made himself stop. After all, it really wasn't any of his business where Nina was. Then he saw her. It took him a moment to process what was going on, because Nina was in the far corner of the gym, and she was playing kickball with Kent. Kent was the pitcher, and as he rolled the ball toward her, he yelled instructions. She kicked it, really connected with the ball, but a kid just beyond second base caught it. They were only practicing, so Kent got the ball back and rolled another pitch to Nina. She was having a wonderful time with charming Kent, the kid who had teased him ever since 2nd grade. Lots of laughing, lots of action, and joking around and talking in kickball land. Where am I? Alec answered his own question. I'm over here in the corner, reading sad science fiction and babysitting Lily. The hand-lettered name card was right there on the table in front of him, and it lined up perfectly with his view of the scene at the kickball diamond, the Losers Club. And as Nina booted another pop fly and then ran up and smacked a big high five with Kent, Alec thought, yep, the name fits. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, off to his left, he heard the squeak, squeak of Mrs. Case's running shoes, and then she was standing there, blocking his view of Nina. She smiled briefly at Lily. Then she said to Alec, Mr. Wilner told me that your club is already growing. That's so nice. What book did the group decide to read first? Alec said, we don't do it that way. We each read whatever we want to. Mrs. Case frowned. But I thought you would choose one book and then read it and have a discussion. Isn't that how a book club works? Alec was in no mood to try to make Mrs. Case happy. Some book clubs are like that, but this is just a club for kids who like to read. That's what I wrote on the application form, so that's what we're doing. Mrs. Case was quiet for a second. Then she said, but if you're all just sitting here reading by yourselves every day, it's hard to imagine what you'll do for your open house presentation. Sorry to bring this up again, but yesterday Mrs. Vance told me she has a scheduling problem, so the extended day open house is going to be part of the all-school open house this year, which means there'll be about 500 kids and parents here. I'm really hoping we can show everyone what an excellent program this is. Do you have any ideas about what you'll do yet for the club presentation? Alec shrugged. We'll figure something out. Mrs. Case opened her mouth as if she had more to say about that, but she smiled as best she could and said, well, have a happy afternoon. And then she turned and squeaked away. Lily looked over at Alec and said, I know the open house is still a long way away and everything, but like the origami kids, they started talking about their ideas on the very first day. So what are we going to do for the open house? Alec answered her in his mind with sarcasm like a blast from the Death Star. I'm going to announce, and now Nina will pretend to be reading as she plays kickball with Kent. But he managed a small smile for Lily. Like I told Mrs. Case, we'll figure something out. Until then, I'm going to keep reading. Chapter 15, 2 Bets. So, did you see me? I kicked that last ball a mile. Nina was breathless. Lily didn't react at all. She was deep into her story, plus she knew Nina wasn't talking to her. Alec looked up from his book. What? Which was kind of a lie because he'd been watching everything. He had also been wishing Mrs. Case would go grab Nina and send her back to the correct activity. Where was the rules lady when she was actually needed? Nina pulled off her pale blue sweatshirt and sat down kitty corner from him. Her face was flushed, and random strands of brown hair were pasted to her forehead. Still panting, she said, you should have seen me. I was playing kickball, and I was good at it, too. Alex smiled. Great. Then he had to ask, but how come Mrs. Case didn't make you go to your club table? Simple, Nina said. I asked Mr. Jensen if I could learn some kickball today in case I switch over to the active games. No problem. Alex stared at her. Switch? He could barely say the word. Is that what you're going to do? Nina stared right back. Are you kidding? Kent called me a wimp last night when he was over playing basketball with Richie. And when I walked into the gym just now, he bet me an ice cream sandwich that he couldn't make 3 good kicks in a row. Oh, Alex said, and he made himself smile. He was glad to hear she'd only been playing because of a bet. Except Nina hadn't exactly looked like a prisoner over there. She had looked like she was having a pretty wonderful time with Kent the handsome, Kent the charming, Kent the kickball champion of the galaxy. Nina added, guess who's getting a free ice cream sandwich at lunch tomorrow? Me. And when Kent comes over to see Richie again tonight, he said he's just going to help me get better at basketball too, because I'm terrible at basketball, especially layups. Alec was still making himself smile, and again he said, great. Then he looked down at his book. It was time to end this conversation. But Nina said, what are you reading? He held up the cover so she could see. She squinted. Ray Bradbury? Never heard of him. Alec said, he's really famous, or that's what my dad told me. This book was his back when he was in 8th grade, one of his favorites. Nina looked at the book. It's really old. Actually, a lot of your books are old, practically antiques. Like that copy of Treasure Island in your backpack? That book is ancient. So what? He said. And anyway, books aren't like that. A book is either good or not. And if it's good, it never gets old. Okay, Nina said, but you have to admit that a lot of the books you like aren't modern. When was the last time you ate bread? Alec asked. What's that got to do with anything? Answer the question. I ate bread today at lunchtime. And is bread modern? No. Exactly, he said. Bread has been around for almost forever, and bread is either good or bad, just like books. Nina was done arguing. Pointing, she said, so tell me about this one. It's a bunch of short stories, science fiction. She wrinkled her nose. I don't like science fiction much, rockets and aliens and stuff. Alec was about to remind her that A Wrinkle in Time is science fiction, and she must have read When You Reach Me, because if you read Wrinkle, then you have to read Reach Me. And what about The Giver? More sci-fi. But instead of starting another argument, he had a better idea. Tell you what, he said, read this one story called All Summer in a Day. And if you don't like it, I'll owe you another ice cream sandwich. But if you do like it, you'll owe one to me. It'll only take a few minutes. Is it a bet? He slid the book down the table to her. She shrugged and smiled, and she picked up the book. Sure, it's a bet. Nina opened the story and began reading. Alec pulled out his worn copy of Treasure Island. He opened the book and propped it up, but he didn't read. He watched Nina's face. She was only on the first page, and she was already hooked. As he watched her, Alec replayed the story in his mind and tried to guess what part she was reading. Nina had been breathing hard from her kickball workout, but as she read on, she grew more and more still until it seemed like only her eyes were moving, word to word and line to line. Alec knew when Nina reached the part where the kids were so mean to Margot. He saw the emotion on her face. And when she got to the very end, he saw that too. Her mouth puckered into a deep frown, and her eyebrows were low and bunched together. She sat and stared like that for at least 10 seconds. Then she noticed Alec watching her. She turned her head and tried to smile at him, and he saw that her eyes were damp. Wow, she whispered, that's amazing. And it didn't feel like science fiction, not at all. She brushed at her eyes with the back of one hand and looked at the book again. Alec was pretty sure she was rereading the last few sentences just as he had. And again she whispered, wow. Nina closed the book and the spell was broken. She slid it back along the table to Alec. When you're done with that, would you ask your dad if I can borrow it? Alec said, he gave it to me. You can borrow it anytime. Great, Nina said. Then she smiled. And tomorrow at lunch, when Kent pays me my ice cream sandwich, I'll bring it straight to you before it melts. Alec laughed. Nice. And then he said, but how about if we split it? Still smiling, Nina nodded. Deal. Lily looked up at them, a small disapproving frown on her face. Alec said, sorry, we're done talking now. It's okay. I'm at a really exciting part, that's all. But as the table got quiet, for just a moment there, Alec wished that this reading club was the way Mrs. Case wanted it to be, because he wondered what else Nina thought about that story, about the characters, about the way the setting felt totally real, about the kids who were so mean, sort of the way Kent was mean to him. And Alec was curious to know if Nina was the kind of reader who wondered what happened after a story ended, because he did that all the time. But this wasn't that kind of book club. So for the next hour and a half, life among the losers was quiet and solitary. Except every once in a while, Nina glanced over her shoulder at the kickball game. And every now and then, Alec glanced across the table at Nina, until he noticed how often he was looking at her. Immediately, he made himself focus on his book, made himself dive deep into the science fiction and stay there. Some of the stories were scary, but letting himself look at Nina and think about her, that felt much scarier. In the back of his mind, he remembered what his dad had said on Saturday. but not using books as a hideout. And he knew that was exactly what he was doing. And he kept doing it anyway. End of chapter.